Good evening and welcome. Thank you for being here. For those of you visiting us tonight, I'm Anita Berisbeitia, Chair of the Landscape Architecture Program, and I'm very pleased to introduce the Daniel Urban Kiley Lecture. The Kiley Fund and Public Lecture was inaugurated in 2003 to honor Dan Kiley and his contributions to the field of landscape architecture, but also to allow us to recognize design excellence in the contemporary practice of landscape architecture. This year, I'm very pleased to introduce João Nunes for the 2015 Daniel Urban Kiley Lecture. João Nunes is a founding principal and CEO of PROAP Landscape Architecture, a multidisciplinary firm based in Lisbon, Portugal, and Treviso, Italy. The firm's trajectory since its founding in 1989 has coincided with the development of landscape architecture in Europe during the last 2.5 decades, prompted in part by the increased need for the design and renovation of public space, the recognition that urban landscapes are a key element of cities, the founding of several landscape programs in key institutions in Europe, and the emergence of new typologies and new opportunities better dealt with through the medium of landscape. As such, the broad range of scales that PROAP has engaged in is impressive. Urban gardens and parks, private and institutional gardens and campuses, fluvial parks, botanic gardens, landscape restorations, streets and pedestrian networks in historic urban cores, housing, environmental assessments, and infrastructure projects such as the Alcántara wastewater treatment plant. Also trace the shift from a gardening-based method to one that incorporates knowledge from multidisciplinary teams that address the complexities of the territorial scale of their recent work. But within this great variety of types and scales, however, there are several ideas that underlie PROAP's work, such as the focus on topography as a locus not only of landscape structure, but of landscape expression, a recognition and articulation of the multiple scales of time embedded in the landscape, and the proposition, distinct to their work, I think, that landscapes are the accumulation of a system of signs. In João's formulation, telluric, entropic, biotic, and anthropic signs that neutralize, strengthen, and oppose each other in the formation of landscapes over time. In addition to his practice, João Nunes is a professor of landscape architecture at the Academy of Architecture in Mendrisio, Switzerland. Please welcome João Nunes.
Thank you, Anita, for the generous presentation. Thank you for the honor of being here in Dan Kiley lecture. Thank you all for coming, for your support. As you see, I put a subtitle. So I add to the first title that was very abstractly time and landscape, another phrase, how things merge. And this is because I think that when I started to look at the drawings, at the photographs, at the texts, merging was probably the major keyword. And I thought that I should open talking about this, and talking about the fact that we live in a fantastic moment of time. And we live in a moment of time where things merge in an incredible way. And times that were apart are suddenly close, and spaces that were apart are suddenly very, very close. And this builds incredibly new relations. These are some photographs from Alfred Seyland, an Austrian photographer, who actually illustrates this idea of merging, this idea of putting together things that were apart, that are supposed to be apart, and that by the energies that correspond to the mounting of today's systems are suddenly and strangely close together. And this actually builds a strange effect of fear, because the big challenge is how local small identities will resist to the dilution in this very strange globality that engulfs everything. How individual is going to perform the resistance of his identity in a world that totally ignores his existence. How the new relations that these very strange new designs of the world propose the existence of each one of us. But actually, apart from fear, this also designs an extraordinary platform for humanity to extend values that go deeper than the ones of moral and religion statements. A sort of human goodness that we really can feel and express in the smaller villages in the heart of Africa or China, talking to people that don't understand what we say, but still invite us to lunch and try to share something about their experience and about their world. So there is a reshaping of these relations. And we still live with what modern thought taught us. This is the Sabaudia plan. And we are still very much framed by modern reading of reality. So we are actually looking for limits, looking for layers, looking for fragments, pieces, joints, ways of linking pieces together, transporting to the world a model of mechanic functioning that builds in us an incredible interest for limit, for joint, for separation, for fragmentation, and for specialization as key readings of the world. So suddenly, we look at things around us and we start to understand that probably it is more interesting to give attention to the way that things merge and trying to ignore the existence of limits than to the obsessive seek for them. Suddenly, the modern thought that built the dream that man and their machines could be able to save the world drop us after a disillusion in another point of a moral condition, that man is suddenly a destroyer, an evil creature that contributes to the destruction of this very nature, from whom it must be protected. So it is like if from in 3,000 years we go from the conscience of a frontier between a man-made world, civiltage, and jungle, salva, a limit that corresponded perfectly to the reading of a design, of the possible design of the world, a world that was protecting man against the dangers of nature, to a situation which is precisely the opposite, where new boundaries and new frontiers are developed and performed with conservative bias to protect nature from man. And probably we are not getting really nowhere with that. These are images from the work of an artist, a Swiss artist named Florio Puenter. He's not really well known, but I think that his work is very interesting in what it reveals. What he does is to remove from big photographs of Switzerland, he removes the signs of the anthropic world. And so he creates these new images. This, for instance, is an image of St. Moritz without St. Moritz. And this idea that we can, in a nostalgical kind of approach, remove this contaminated hand and be back to something else, something primitive, something clean, lead us to a model that I believe is completely dangerous for the future by two reasons. The first, because we are, as a species, as humans, intrinsically condemned to transform. We have to transform the world around us. We are always critical about what is surrounding us, and our existence depends on how we change environment around us. So we are changers, we are builders, we are transformers by nature. That's our nature. So when we are transformers and transformation is immediately labeled with a moral condemned as wrong thing to do, we are kind of in a schizophrenical weak law without a way to work it out. On the other hand, when we consider that every transformation is wrong, we are actually changing our point of view, the direction of our analysis from is there a transformation to is this transformation really good? Because there are many things that actually change the world in a good direction. And when we talk about landscape, I really believe in the possibility of reclaiming the possibility of transforming the world without damaging it. And I think that landscape architecture is the right tool to do it, is the precise tool to do it, to propose ways of transforming the world, of following the desires and the ambitions and the dreams of community to transform the world accordingly to their wishes, to their convictions of what the future should be, without damaging the relations with the other communities with whom we have to share the world. Landscape. This is the famous Archimedes palimpsest. It's a very famous image. It shows a palimpsest, so the rewriting of a document that has been previously erased. And I think that this is really interesting because I usually use it as a clear metaphor for landscape construction because he actually is not able to erase everything. So there are signs that are still readable, and he actually reacts to the organization that was previous to his layer. So he crosses 90 degrees the direction of his writing, and he actually creates something that is capable of holding the three things together: the first writing, the second writing, and the third thing that is the result of the crossing between the two. And I think that landscape works in a constructive way pretty much like this. It's a reactive construction, and if we think that we can mix together, we can merge agents that are totally anatropic and agents that are totally anthropic in the same big mixture, we have the result of an overlaying process during time, during an enormous amount of time, that practically describes the construction of landscape. But landscape, we can talk about landscape that can be the product of very intentional and projectual transformations, like a project, like a collective project, like a power project, like a big drainage system like the Bonifica in Roman times or in fascist times in Italy. Enormous extensions of land that were totally changed from the dimension of a swamp, a strange place with malaria and all kinds of diseases and spirits and ogres and all that, and suddenly changed into a place where it was possible to grow food. So it was a change that was totally consensual. And these changes, these constructions, they were clearly oriented as a project. Let's do this. Other transformations, other actions that actually build landscape in the very same way of overlapping layers are the product of anonymous changing, anonymous productions, anonymous repetitions, like the the wall that is built by a farmer, or the new wall that is discovered by another farmer that is re-answered in one situation that works well and everybody copies it, and suddenly it becomes a new way of building landscape. So we have different ways of understanding these energies, but if we try to look at them in a time reading perspective, they all are overlaying moments. So from palimpsest, we can describe these processes as additions, and we can find so many metaphors in so many fields, like the layers of ink that suddenly detach and revealed what was below. So beautiful results of interactions that are strange interactions. Sometimes this is in Mexico, precisely in Mexico, and these are signs that are done by the military. So they are like personal inscriptions that allow us to count how many were the Spanish guys that were entering those chambers. So we are talking about something that has to do with overlaying signs, that has to do with the fact that each generation discovers its problems, its urgencies, its emergencies, and develops a set of changes in the world according to what they think is the solution to those things. Sometimes their problems are the solutions that the generation before invented. However, there is like a link, there is like a continuous changing that is actually investing the efforts of everyone in doing things, changing things. And each layer of signs is actually the footprint of these gestures, of the exercise of life, where actually the signs that come out the functioning of human community mix up with all the other communities in the world. So in any way, we are talking about a mixed system of overlaying and small transformations, overlaying of new technological possibilities, of new dreams, of new ambitions, of new situations. This is another metaphorical photograph. This is a sidewalk in Milan, and this is the same motorcycle support repeated more than 200 times in 2 square meters. And the repetition is amazing because we revealed always the same direction, and the guy parked his motorcycle hundreds of times in places that are only one from the other, small, some centimeters. So it's like the portrait of a repetition of a gesture, or something that shows a moment of life, something that shows an almost strange repetition of a gesture. So we are talking about continuity implicitly. And these are the paintings of the caves of Chauvet. They were made famous by the film of Werner Herzog, The Cave of the Lost Dreams, a beautiful documentary that shows us inside this cave where we cannot go because it is totally sealed. And the story of the cave is beautiful because, well, the images, the pictures are beautiful, and it is amazing to think how a human hand could draw these paintings 40,000 years ago. But the amazing story of the cave is that it was kept used as a ritual space for 20,000 years. So for 20,000 years, one space was used as a ritual space, meaning that there was a coherent culture that was using coherently that space for that long. And afterwards, there was like a sudden geomorphological movement, and the entrance of the cave was sealed. So the cave was totally inaccessible for other 20,000 years. So it is like a story of continuity, but blocked continuities that actually enable us to see the first set of continuous use suspended in time. And this is already an extraordinary story, but the beautiful is that when they started to analyze and to datate each one of these images, that we immediately look as a composition and we immediately imagine an artist doing this. Well, they were done thousands of years apart. So this means that there was a continuous production of this image. It was not a painting that was done and then preserved for 20,000 years. It was actually the result, the continuous result of the exercise of one culture, doing it over, doing it good, creating something that is actually so much the demonstration of the possibility of building something during time, building something during a long time that immediately make us think about the next idea. And the next idea has to do with the fact that we are what culture makes us. This is an image from François Truffaut, L'Enfant Sauvage. It was a very naive film about these things, but actually it was like enhancing the fact that we overestimate our individual existence and we underestimate our collective existence, our social existence, and we even don't consider the fact that this social condition has to do with contemporarity, but has also to do with a system that goes from our genealogical origins to our sons. So it is something that is built in time and in space, exactly as landscape. So this means that when we are removed from this cultural continuity, we become something else. We become the culture that is hosting us temporarily. And there are many examples, apart from François Truffaut, Enfant Sauvage, like the wolf child. In Portugal in the 80s, there is an extraordinary case of a chicken girl that repeated all the gestures of chicken, and it was extraordinary. And there are examples of gorillas. I remember a fantastic story of a gorilla scientist that was raising his baby with baby gorillas, and suddenly she got very, very worried because the baby was repeating all the gestures of the young gorillas with whom he was actually socializing. So this means that this idea of continuum, of continuity, is something that has so much to do with us that probably we should bring it up to the idea of landscape. And in landscape, we talk a lot in continuity in spatial terms, but we don't talk a lot about continuity in time terms. So, on another hand, if landscape is actually built by the imprinting of the signs of life, of the footprint of the gestures, of the action of the life, the daily life of communities, then this means then that landscape can act as a portrait of those communities. I mean, we can read the functioning of those communities from the landscape that they design. And in the anthropic field, this means that we can actually have a vision of their values, of their codes, of their ideas, of their relations with the other communities with whom they share the territory. So continuity, and I would fix this idea and this word as fundamental for the project reading that we are going to have. L'unité d'habitation à Marseille, because it has to do with continuity, it has to do with rupture, it has to do with war, and it has to do with an idea of generous architecture that I think is also important to bring back to this moment. One of the reasons that I think l'unité d'habitation is beautiful is the fact that it is deeply generous. the major concern of this construction is serving others, and the major concern is to serve people that were left without nothing in the war, so they had to have a house that could give them everything. They had to feel complete with this house. So it is so deeply generous and so deeply beautiful that I think that it is an extraordinary example for a moment where architecture is dropping this generosity and starting to become too much self-celebrative. Two other words that are key words for the description of the projects that I'm going to do is system and dynamic. System, because obviously when we talk about landscape, we talk about something that is in a system. We don't have objects. We have relations. We don't have things. We have relations between things. We don't have the possibility of understanding something that is not inserted in a global system. On the other hand, it is dynamic. It changes always. It is always changing. So it is transitory. It is impermanent. It is unstable. And it has many cycles and many dimensions of time. And our projects, obviously, they have to adjust to this changing. And we always feel like if we are catching a train in the move. And this idea, well, it is something that also happens with us, as the work of Irina Werning shows us in a very inquainted way. I think that the fact that we are so time-dependently raises the possibility of identifying the possibility of understanding some methodological singularities that could describe landscape architecture as an identitary discipline. Another key word is interstice. And I think interstice is a very important keyword. This idea of time and this idea of space that I was describing before take us to the possibility of understanding hierarchies between times and spaces, important moments, less important ones, important spaces, less important spaces. And we usually get the less important spaces. I remember a book from Beazley, I guess. It was a book called Design and Detail of the Space Between Buildings. And Beazley was stating out this book as a manifesto. It was like saying, give me those leftovers between buildings and I will change it into a system that it is able to qualify your lives, that it is able to give you something from nothing, precisely like those soups that are made in the country by those old ladies that only have the leftovers of the week to make something to eat. So it is, again, a generous idea. And interstices can be extremely important to the description of these works. So we are talking about a moment where we can easily recognize, with no need for the definition of a limit, an extraordinarily beautiful connection between man-made and natural, between past and future, and between so many dimensions that can really become the themes for our work. I've got 8 projects and an ongoing project. I got the ongoing project because it's really exciting and because it is very much accordingly to this idea, to how things merge. So the first is a park. They are all competitions. Some are lost competitions. I very much care about lost competitions. I don't consider them a shame and a failure. I think that they are extraordinary moments of research, and sometimes they are the best works that we do. We did a book putting together our lost competitions because I think that it was a shame to let them just become forgotten. This is a one competition, and it has to do with time. The key words are time interstice, are time suspension, and the promiscuity of between landscape production and agriculture and forestry techniques. I will tell you the context. It is a sad context. As you can see, this is a project that was a competition made in 2009. The starting was 2009. This is Madrid peripheric area. So talking about 2008, when the competition was launched, and Madrid means to talk about severe crisis. From one moment, it was possible to suppose that 150,000 apartments could be brought to the market and sold out easily. And the next day morning, it was totally impossible, and it was a totally stupid idea. However, the promoter was condemned to develop all the public construction works, infrastructures and parks. He had already done this park that was done by the forestry department of the Madrid municipality, and as it was a forest park, it was done in the shape of a tree, so it happens. And then he was launching another park, and this is 87 hectares. It was quite a big park, and we were very excited about this thing, so we started to dream and to imagine green lawns and beautiful buildings and all that. And suddenly we understood that the guy was already crushed in terms of economy, in terms of financing. He had already spent a lot of money building all those roads, all those sewage systems, all the infrastructures that the park should have. So probably this could be a saving opportunity. So we designed our wish, our dream, and one of the conditions of the park was that we had to protect this beautiful passage. It was a transhumance. Do we say transhumance in English? Yes. It was a transhumance road for the sheep of the king, and we are talking about 2 million sheep, 2.5 million sheep that were passing on that road. And another condition was that the park should be closed. It should be closed by a construction, by a protection, So we were reading topography and understanding what we could do, and trying to design this possible dream. And we thought, well, if we were in a normal condition, we had to move over doing our tender documents and with everybody yelling at us, saying, well, come on, because the people want to come here and they are buying houses. But in this particular context, nobody was buying, and there was no risk that nobody was buying. So we could hold this for 15 or 20 or 25 years. So we thought that probably we could develop a system of building the park that would come out not from normal landscape building techniques, but from forestry and agriculture. So we did build the construction around the site, and the construction around the site is like a wall, a building wall, a continuous building of about 1,800 meters. A wall that will hold all the infrastructures, because if the strategy is to use agriculture and forestry construction systems to define the spaces of the park, then obviously we have to keep infrastructure on the peripheric areas, on the sites. So we couldn't get infrastructure to the middle of the park. So we did this wall that works as a work in progress wall, and we proposed the system of ongoing construction based on agriculture and forestry plantation, developing an idea where the park can be actually activated whenever we want, because there is always the possibility of moving it faster if we want, but actually trying to hold the construction in time and trying to suspend the construction in a time that we predicted around 20 years. So when all these systems are built and are designed and are shaped, we can start to use it, and we can use the fields and the agriculture fields as the opportunity to requalify the soil. We are in situations where the soil was very much moved, so we use these 20 years of agriculture production to raise the fertility level, and by that to increase the possibility of having better quality spaces whenever the park is finished. So we are like using time as a building instrument, not really building with time, but using a dilated time to be able to suspend the construction, reducing the price of the construction. And the reduction is really sensitive. I mean, we are cutting costs to 1/5 of the cost. Another project that works with time is in Lisbon. So this is what happened from the 60s to the 80s, where every agriculture sign was replaced by peripheral facilities for the city, like wastewater treatment plants, landfills, military equipment deposits, and suddenly, in the 90s, the washover of all those things, and the recovery of a clean conscience about this part of the city, and this succession of images really shows us the possibility of confirming that idea that landscape is the portrait of a community. And here, yes, in the 60s was Lisbon, a very provincial city, still very much attached to agriculture practice. Yes, indeed it was. And was it in the 80s a pretty much relaxed city growing with no big consideration for what was happening in periphery? Yes, it was. And was it in the 90s, preparing for the Expo, the moment of the triumph of road system and the construction of a clean image, moving from all those stinkies to a park? So it's like the process of really cleaning the path. Well, this was a project that was developed after a master plan that was done in collaboration with Hargreaves Associates. So we had some formal constraints, and those formal constraints, we tried to use them as the departure point for a thought that had to do with something that was giving me a big anguish on that moment, because we were always talking about process, and we were saying that, well, landscape is a process, but then we were moving on projects exactly as Le Nôtre, doing a drawing and then moving it to the gardener so that the drawing could be imprinted in the land and repeatedly confirmed by maintenance. Well, where is the process? So we were trying to understand the possibility of inventing arguments inside the projects that could actually bring this idea of process a little bit into life. And as we were working with a system of landforms that had a birth that was conditioned by a very formal sculptoric approach, but then they were actually part of something that had to do with the creation of a system of shelterings for the wind, a system of managing how how the perception of this enormous surface of water could be perceived from the different points of the park, creating relations that should actually make it a little bit more complex in terms of reading, and so on. These landforms were actually facing south and north. So we had the juxtaposition of two situations that could help us to develop the issue for this process idea. So if these were the two major contrasting situations in terms of vegetation conditions, then the project should act as radicalizing this difference. So on the south face, it tries to get to the most receptive in terms of energy, of solar energy slope that we could. And on the north, we were trying to dramatize the contrast, moving to a very, very shadowed and vertical slope, so that if the park was abandoned, it could actually always show these drawings that were corresponding to vegetation that would be developed in extremely different ecological conditions. Well, then I think it's a project that was designed between 1996 and 1997. It's still going on in the later phases, and I think that it has all the problems of a youth project. Is very schematic. It's quite schematic. I mean, we get excited by an idea and we want it really to show. So it loses sometimes some parts of elegance. Another idea was the idea of overlaying. The idea of overlaying was very, very clear. We were trying to show the new layer that was corresponding to the new transformation and the old layer of land that was totally rebuilt. We see here some movements of the constantly reconstruction of these systems. We had, I'm not sure if it was clear, we were here in the construction grounds of that bridge. This bridge was being, this bridge was being built here, and everybody that was here was totally destroyed by these construction yards. I think that this image shows it a little bit clearly. We see here a big white, and it is already being recovered here. So it was pretty much destroyed. So the layer, the other layer was, this layer was as artificial as the rest, but it was like representing this past layer. So it's using time as a builder, using time as something that instead of going against the project and going against the construction, destroying it with entropy, destroying it with the need of constant maintenance, it is something that helps the project to build itself. It's something that helps the project to keep going. So time again. Now this is time, again time, and this is time mixed with interstice. It's an idea for installation. It's something that is supposed to live for 5 months. And the idea was that we were in this field, in this red field. This is another competition that we won, so there was a relation in terms of geography. And this field was part of a plan that was actually changing from agriculture to urban here. And the idea was to perform this installation that should actually show this passage, talk about this passage. And it was a quite difficult idea. So how do we talk about the passage from agriculture to urban? How do we talk about that? How do we show that? It was a very anonymous kind of piece of land. It was even a piece of a field. It was not a real field. It was cut out of a field. So it had quite a singular structure. However, it was interesting because we were seeing the highway already, so it was something that had a good starting point. We thought that agriculture was a ritual activity. It was actually moved on by a rhythm. It was a ritual, and it was in many times sacred. It still is in some countries of our knowledge. And we were trying to talk about the possibility of understanding that after this ritual era, agriculture was mostly sacrificial. And it was human sacrifice or beast sacrifice until it was removed, this sacrificial idea, by mechanization and by industrialization. So we were passing from ritual to sacrifice, and from sacrifice to the dimension of machine and industry. And we probably could re-ritualize this agriculture for these 5 months, trying to understand the possibility of imprinting the signs of agriculture by using different ways and by using urban ways. So we talked to this band and we talked to this choreographer, and we tried to invent a dance, a performance, a dance that would actually imprint in the land the precisely same signs that an agriculture process would perform, would imprint. So it was like repeating the same signs, but using the instruments and the tools that correspond now to another layer, proposing precisely the perception of this moment as an interstice, as a time in between, and as something that is floating between one culture and another. So we had some problems, obviously, with the choreograph, with the musicians that were totally mad, with the dancers, because we first tried to make them actually pull a plug, and they had to tell us, well, we are no mules, and we had to invent another way of doing it, like doing the signs with the machine, then bearing a rope and making them only pulling the rope out. So there was a moment of burning, then there was a moment of there they are, the Alemalian Vazarat. If you don't know them, try to see, because they are really interesting. Then there was a moment of harvesting and a moment of eating, which was the celebration and the end of the celebration. So we were like talking about time, talking about this suspended time between one life of that site and another. And this actually talks a little bit about the same thing. We are in the north of Portugal, we are in Viseu, and in Viseu we have this extraordinary octagon, and it is like the sign of a Roman construction, probably a military construction. And this military construction survived to life for 2,000 years, and land was used and fragmented, and this structure was always kept because it was not part of the productive system. It was something else, but it was totally abandoned. And we were developing these two parks here, and along with a friend and master and teacher, a great architect from Portugal called Gonçalo Birne, who was working here, we suddenly said, why don't we make it become a connection of our three projects and the historical center of the city? And like that, we could have an argument to bring it back to life, because it was really falling apart, and it was like this, because in the 40s, this area was brought to life with an idea of celebration of a national hero. You know, those nationalistic moments where we really need to have an hero in the past that justifies genealogically the high quality of the people. So they invented this hero called Viriato, who was a resistant to Romanization. He was all the world was Romanized, but he was resisting like Asterix, exactly like Asterix. And so it was totally fake. It was totally fake. This was a Roman construction. Obviously, it was perfectly geometrical. I mean, the size of the octagon are precisely 220 meters. They are extraordinarily well designed, and the beauty of this is precisely this incredible perfection of an abstract measure that we are not able to see in here, because they start to plant trees and to make it become like a garden, and it was the end of it. So we were, you know, those problems that we have because we weren't there, that they are going to kill us because we have to cut a lot of trees, and we all know that cutting a lot of trees is a big problem, even when we have to cut a lot of trees. So this was how it was when we found it. And the idea was to propose basically measure and basically to introduce the possibility of remeasuring it, to enhance the sharp precision of that figure, to precisely show the incredible beauty of this extraordinary sign in landscape. And at the same time, by producing this measure element, we would refer to the erosion of the structure that was actually holding it. So it was something that had to do with showing the beauty of the old structure, but also the time that had eaten it up. So it was just a position of elements that had this double output, this double possibility. Obviously, there was also the need to rebuild the continuity on this structure. So it is about two times that are apart and that are put together in order to rebuild the dignity of the first. This is another project. This is a lost competition. It's in Belgium, and it was a total cast error. It was a very sophisticated idea that I think nobody really was following. And we were talking about Remembrance Park. The Remembrance Park was an idea of going to this place where one of the worst wars was happening. It was the First World War. For 4 years, those guys were hiding in trenches, one in front of the other, like 1 kilometer apart. And this is the city of Ypres before the war. This is the city of Ypres during the war. And this is the reconstruction. So we are really through a very, very traumatic process. Everything was erased, everything. And the fact is that they were very much worried because nobody was remembering the war, so they were trying to do this big Remembrance Park. And when we tried to talk to these guys, we understood that forgetting was actually a need for them. So we started to understand that between remembering and forgetting, there is this chance, there is this possibility that sometimes designs life. And we thought that we could design a park that could be moved between two dimensions. So like if we had two tunnels of perception, one that actually links together all the facts that have to do with war, and we have cemeteries all around and small monuments and bombs that didn't explode and facts like that. So we have places, we have sites, and then we have an incredible territory that's the no man's land between the two trenches. So we thought that we could have one park that moves us together, moves us joining all those points in a remembrance channel, in the memorial channel, and another one that would talk about other things, talk about food, talk about views, talk about ecology, talk about all the other facts that have to do with the fact that forgetting is possible. So we could move along this territory in two different tunnels, having two totally different perceptions of the very same territory. So it was like a manifesto about the fact that even if landscape is actually pretty much physical and material, and we can objectively describe it by something that can be explained by scientific arguments and transformed by machines and manpower, it is always what we read about it. It is always our perception of it. So it was like working in these perceptive terms and trying to build in the very same territory two readings totally different of the same reality. And then we thought, well, but it could be nice if we could link them, if we could find a way of moving with hope from the memorial path to the oblivion path. And we thought that we could ask artists to refer in a very abstract way to the war. So we challenged a lot of artists, and it was very, very, very fun to represent their readings of how the war could be referred, and they were very creative. Some guys discovered that there was a group of Pakistani that were part of the Commonwealth army that died there, and before they died, during their years in the trench, they wrote a book of songs that became very popular in their country. So we tried to get it back and to understand if we could perform it. So we were like cultivating this artistical way of getting together. This is a Portuguese artist. It's José Pedro Croft. We were like cultivating many different possibilities. This is a Belgian guy. He was doing an extrusion of pieces of land. And well, I remember that one of the members of the jury was asking suddenly, what does a black horse without a head has to do with the First World War? And I understand that we were losing the competition on that very moment. Then we have a project that is the very same theme that is occupying our students here in this studio. And I brought this project only to move very quickly through it and to talk about two keywords that I mentioned, the dynamic and the systemic idea of landscape. And it is really interesting. This is an island in the middle of the ocean. This is São Miguel Island in the Azores. We are working on it right now. And this island was built by the activity of 4 volcanoes. And one of the volcanoes is the one that is centering our attention. And it is a volcano that had a very complex succession of explosions, defining several calderas, one craters, one inside the other. I'm sorry. So we had a big one, and then another one, and then the one that became the lake. And this is important because all the problems of this area have to do with the fact that they are growing, they are raising cows very, very intensely. And as it is a crater, it is draining, everything is draining inside the lake, and the lake is dying with terrible ecological problems. And the only way to save the lake is actually to work in a systemic way that starts in the watershed and to operate changes that have to do with management of the fields, management of the water, and with other operations that have to do with the fact that there are strange fumaroles in the base of the crater. So the project was actually proposing an action for all the basin, all the watershed, and proposing 7 nucleus of work. The project was actually left in the middle. Some of the operations were misunderstood, others were considered as only a cosmetical kind of a performance. But one of the most important things was that we were trying to propose a system where we could manage the intensity of use of the cattle raising without changing the property of the fields. And suddenly the government, that obviously has too much money, decided to buy everything and to solve everything by that way. And I think it was a loss in terms of landscape construction ideas, because, well, not only because it's too easy, because if we buy land and we do whatever we want, then we solve every kind of problem, but because it was done by chasing out the farmers and chasing out the people that were actually supposed to be building this landscape with everybody. So it was quite a shock when we understand that it was being done that way. We thought it was perpetent, and we thought it was a loss in conceptual terms. But they were very happy because they were actually collecting funds to do it and so on. But I think that it would be much more intelligent, much more creative, and much more clever to do it in a participative way with the farmers. Well, the project then develops small actions at the level of the lake that we were able to see some of them. Others were not yet built, and they all propose the reading of the landscape as a matrix, as a structural matrix, where we have these little moments, these little pieces that respond to the needs of the inhabitants of this place. So we propose a way of inhabiting it, of using it, of moving around it, by adding very small chirurgical things. Now, 2 projects that talk about overlaying. This is a waste treatment plant in Alcântara. Alcântara is a valley in Lisbon, a valley that has this history of being an artage production place, a beautiful place with this kind of idea of a bucolical area where not only vegetables were produced, but it was also like a park. Well, suddenly, in the 30s, this valley becomes an infrastructural valley, and the river is enchanneled in a big infrastructure, a big tunnel that holds the river right now. And at the top of the river, a new avenue is designed. And this is a postcard. So it is interesting that all the iconography that was celebrating this valley as a beautiful bucolical park, productive park, suddenly becomes centered in the progress idea that is revealed by this new avenue. Well, but the valley afterwards receives also all the infrastructure system of the accessibilities to the new bridge in the 60s. And afterwards, in the 80s, it becomes the emplacement for the first waste treatment plant of Lisbon. And it is precisely the requalification of this waste treatment plant that is the theme for a competition that is won in 2009. And, well, the first thing is, well, we tried to understand how we could do it, but we had no room for doing it otherwise than a very technical kind of way, a building. And it was a building that starts here and finishes there. So it's a building that is as big as 8 blocks of Lisbon. And when we think about it as a building, it's really frightening because we start to think about drainage and we are in a valley and all that. But when we think about a topographical element and when we think about the possibility of using this element to build some kind of a prothesical element that actually rebuilds the topography of the valley, being that the first waste treatment plant was cutting this bight. So we could move on trying to propose that the new building could work out as the continuity of this valley, designing a new platform that was so designed not only by the voids that we need to hold the equipments underneath, but also by the possibility of designing this topographical continuity. And then we could try to work on this cover, reducing its damage in terms of hydrological systems by using it exactly as the farmers would use it in the beginning, fixing a rule for slope and for intermediate wall height, and trying to import soil like these guys did. So creating a totally artificial plantation guided by these two rules, slope and height of walls, creating the revelation of the topography of this cover and trying to keep apart from the limits so that the real dimension of the building was not revealed. So it was probably the most frightening project that because it was like the only actual prospect facade of the building was the cover, and it works out quite well because the indefinition of the limits are actually able to make the building disappear in a very interesting way. The only facade is the cover. The other facade is reduced to a sliding surface, like if it was an archaeological movement. On the contrary, the contemporary layer is like being buried in an oblivion level, so that the actual cover works as the living facade of the building. Another project that works with overlaying is this project in Ribeira das Naus, done with João Gomes da Silva. And we are talking about the most iconical plaza of Lisbon here, and our site is just the site. So this is Praça do Comércio, the old Terreiro do Paço, and we are looking at a photograph of the Baixa de Lisboa. This is how the site was, semi-abandoned and used poetically by young couples that were capable of having an incredible power of abstraction, trying to understand what the place was and trying to dig in cartography from the first representations of Lisbon. And here we see Lisbon as it was before the earthquake of 1755, and we see that this was a very important place. We see that this is the royal palace that was coming down from the Arabic Alcazaba in the 14th century. And it was like designing a diagram of the state functioning. Well, this is the king, this is the opera house, very important for our kings. This is the site where the ships were built, so that we could propose these new routes of commerce and exploration of the world. This is the palace of the intendant of the construction yard. This is a representation plaza, and these are the customs, and this is the market. So everything was working here. Ships would go, ships would come, leaving the products, paying money, receiving money, paying to the opera. Everything was actually clearly working out. And this is after the earthquake. This is a plan that shows the palimpsest of the new layout of the city and the old one. And we see that this practically is not changed. We have a dock here, a smaller dock, 2 ramps for launching ships. And we see that this keeps going on pretty much the same during time. This is the first landfill of Lisbon, trying to get the first quay. Then others follow. And the site, another landfill. This one holds the infrastructure system of the railway to Cascais. And you see that this is always the same. The dock, a second dock now is already earthed. well, iconography confirms these relations, the royal palace, the Corte Real palace, the construction yard. More or less diagrammatically. After the earthquake, other representations that were, and we get to the 20th century with this kind of image. We have a photographic survey of the site showing still lots of activity in the construction yard, the dock open, our king, the last king. It is important because it enables us to understand the height. He was very short. The height of the ramps for launching the ships. Here a ship being launched. The constructions that were made for the construction of the boats. The dry dock gates. All an incredible activity, and suddenly in the 50s this was crushed by the opening of this road, a strange road that designed the leftovers that we saw before, and the road performed a very strange urbanistic perversity, because this plaza is a scenographic plaza, and we enter it passing here, and we are crushed in very compressed spaces. Then we have a sudden open, then we have another compressed space, and then it opens, and we have light and water and sun and everything in the south. And suddenly what they do is to propose an entrance on this side, which is terrible. So it totally changes the possibility of understanding this plaza. So what the proposal tries to do, trying to understand the incredible importance of this site, because it's the only site where the city is contacting the river without having in between a stripe of infrastructural land. And we kind of retrace these signs and give them new possibilities. And when we retrace these signs, we kind of redesigned the historical footprint of the coast, and then we propose a new settlement, a totally new future beach, a place for where the couples in love can go and see the river and play songs. And it was like inventing this space in between. So we have the dock again, betting that probably it was still there, so it was a very risky bet, but it was needed so that we could detach these two spaces that are totally different and were promiscuously connected. Then we have the new ramps that are actually redesigned on the top of the others, and those are amphitheaters to catch sun and to see the river. Then we have the archaeological reconstruction of the dry dock. And by doing this thing, we redesign the coastline, the old coastline, and we add in a totally different project, like another project, a new beach, and in between we have this space. And we can use this space to keep passing with cars, or we can cut cars and make it become just a big public space. So these are the elements of the project. And the idea was to articulate this in a big public space connection that could also involve all the ground floors of the palaces. So these are some moments of the construction, and we were right. There was everything, and we were lucky, more than right. And we were using our guys to do some archaeology. We had only one archaeologist, and we had to use gardeners to do this work, and they were very happy. And this is the other part of the project, is the construction of the beach. It's a concrete beach that actually is hanging on mud, so it's very complexly built, and it works quite well. And the performance of the waste treatment plant enables us to have water of some quality. So now the trouble is to keep people out of the water, because they jump in and it's not that good. Okay, so now it's probably one of the most desired public places of the city. It's quite successful, and it's quite a pleasure to see it working like that. It's also challenging in terms of maintenance, but they are doing all right. And the ongoing project is the Mount Palatino, and it's quite an incredible story. Well, I had this phone call, and a guy from Superintendencia asked me to go there and to make a tour in Paladino. And he was very worried because he thought that people were not well treated when visiting that thing, which is actually correct. And people pay a lot of money, something like 15 euros for visiting only Palatino, other 50 for Forum Romano, and then they are launched in a sort of military campaign where they are left alone with no shadow, no water, no nothing, no toilets, nothing. So but the fantastic thing was to discover everything about this site, and to start to visit the place where everything begins, and to understand its story. And it was quite frightening because suddenly it was like understanding that the mount is not a mount. The mount is a mountain of palaces, is a mountain of buildings. Everything is built, and is built at the top of buildings, at the top of buildings, at the top of buildings, like with 6 layers of buildings. So it's like if the mount was actually a building. Everything of the mount is a building, and you cannot tell where the building starts and the mount finishes, where topography starts and finishes. You cannot tell anything. Everything is just building, and this is an actually correct reading of Mount Palatino. So when we talk about how things merge, I think this could be probably one of the best ways of finishing the lecture, showing the house of Livia that proudly crushes the domus transitoria of Nero. And it was intentional, because this idea of respecting the other layer is quite new. Those guys actually wanted to kill it because they had to make it disappear. It was their layer that should perform. It was their layer that should show. So I tried to develop in this incredibly complexity the idea that Mount Palatino is actually a building. And one of the archaeologists said, well, that's a good idea. That's actually a good vision to start working. But it's strange at the same time, because Palatino comes from Pallas, which is the god of the shepherds. So how do we put together this idea of an immense building, a mountain building, with this idea of shepherds and bucolism? I said, no, you're getting it wrong. The idea of palace is the idea of domestication. We are domesticating a mountain. This is a mountain domesticated. It's not a bucolic idea of a shepherd in a white tunic playing the flute. It's the fact that this is domesticated hill, a domesticated mountain. And then again, the idea of interstice is brought to light, because in this incredible settlement, what we have is spaces in between times, spaces in between buildings. And the trouble is that the spaces in between were actually considered as spaces for gardening. So they were building a composition that was centered not in the things that defined the interstice, but in the interstice itself, building other relations and building the possibility of understanding nothing, which is actually what happens. So the idea is probably to bring all this together, all these times together, and to redesign this interstice with new relations. There is an image here that shows clearly this idea of garden They are set. As you can see, the interstice, the spaces that are then, and we are between the house of Augusto and the house of Rómulo, and we are just passing in a space that's suddenly becomes centered in the passage, becomes centered in the path. So it is like, and this is an extraordinary set, and they try to place in a time hierarchy all the pieces that they were gathering. And I was asking the architects, but I mean, is this accurate? I mean, yes, it is accurate actually, because some of these pieces are contemporary, those that are there. And this is explainable because things are not actually only used during 100 years. They are probably used more than that time. So technologies, they mixed as everything mix when we actually talk about things that merge together. Thank you so much for your time and patience.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Will you take any questions?
Of course. Yes, of course. No questions. It's a bit too late, perhaps.
No, well, I wanted to say thank you so much for this. To hear you talk about continuities in a school that talks so much about change and flux is remarkable. And I hope you, especially those that survived the second year of core, appreciate a conversation about landscapes that persist through time, because they exist in the imagination, in the consciousness, but also as a way of working, not only through the idea of merging things and connecting them, but also of looking for continuity in the cartography of a project. I find it a refreshing and remarkable thing in the context of this school, actually. What do you think?
Oh, we have a question. Hi.
Sylvia.
Hi.
Yes, of course.
João, thank you so much for this wonderful lecture. It's me. Your work also operates within certain recognizable contexts that are also close to your own context. So in one hand, you are dealing with sites that have this layering of structures, built structures, natural structures. I'm wondering, how do you translate your method and your techniques as landscape architect, as urbanist, into other sites? And I'm guessing that you worked also in sites that doesn't have this layering. Where do you find and how do you find this layering? And what you do when there's no layering? And I'm exaggerating because we always can find layerings of certain kind.
Yeah, one of the interests of working in the Azores is precisely the reduced thickness of layering. We are in islands that are 25,000 years old, so they didn't exist more than 25,000 years ago, and they were occupied by humans only less than 500 years ago. So we are talking about something that is actually not very complex in terms of layering. But then layering is actually complexly mixed between the natural layering and the anthropic layering. And one of the things that actually merge is this two sides of the islands, and they merge perfectly. What I do is actually try to get together with people that are from locals, and I think it is impossible to work when we go to. I think it is very arrogant to go to a place and to think that we can read more than the guys that actually are there. So we need them desperately, and we really, really need them. But sometimes we add the possibility of understanding something that to them is so inserted in banality that becomes invisible. So sometimes our reading of coming from a totally different culture discovers things that for them are invisible. There is a beautiful text of John Berger that I usually read to my students about this possibility of reading between spaces, between interstices. It has to do with the analogy of cinema and the velocity of the speeds that flicker by upon our eyes, and the possibility of inventing another speed of reading. So we read between photograms. We create other possibilities of reading, and I think that this is what happens when we go to a faraway country and we start to try to understand and to look hard and to see between things that they don't see. So I think that the answer is I try to get together with local guys, and I try to get very much alert to looking between things. And thank you. There was another one, yes. It was the same question.
Yeah, I was interested in your methodology, and I think that your answer touched on that a bit. But maybe you could speak for some of us younger students and people newer to the field. Is how did you hit on this methodology? At what point did you take on this interest in the layers, or was it always something that you carried with you?
Well, the method, as you could see, has to do with a very radical research about everything that has to do with the site where we were working. So I tried to place it in a system in terms of contemporarity, and I tried to relate it also in terms of time. So I try to get as much information as I can of the past of that site, of the relations that it had in the past. So it has to do with an incredible, deep research about the history of the site. And if in some circumstances this is easy, in others, like in the Palatino, it's really hard, because you always get another thing in between. I mean, and you think that it is clear, and suddenly another guy brings you something that was inserted between those times and those spaces, and there was another guy with a strange name that was actually changing the first palace in another one. So it is so active and so heavily dynamic that actually is hard. It's still hard, and I'm studying this thing now for 2 months, and it is still hard to understand all the moments and all the ideas. However, I think that it is very important to move very attemptive between solid analysis and solid analysis and intuition. And I think that the intuition, the ideas, the basic ideas that talk to me about this possible understanding of the mount as a building, and about the possibility of understanding this kind of magma that is between everything, that merges things, that creates this space between the buildings, that creates this space either in horizontal reading and in vertical reading, this sort of matter, strange matter. It's not earth, it's something that has to do with life, with people, with bodies, with food, with pieces of building. I mean, it's something that is actually the solid representation of all those years and of all those guys. And these ideas were intuitive. They did not come from analyzing. So what I think that is very important is to develop analyses as much as you can to confirm your intuitions, and not as much as they can kill your intuitions, which happens a lot. So keep your intuitions fresh, make them alive, and try to confirm them as much as possible through work and research. I think this is a method.
Yesterday we had a fantastic presentation by the artist Richard Tuttle, who said that the important thing was not to learn to do art, but how to be an artist. And I think, João, you have just told us how to be a landscape architect. So thank you very much.